In a small apartment on the outskirts of London, the flickering light of a table lamp pulses like the faint breath of Eleanor, 78 years old. She sits there, by a window streaked with frost, her clouded eyes gazing out at the silent street. Tonight, like so many nights before, she waits for James, her only son. The wall clock ticks steadily, but the phone never rings. A cup of tea grows cold on the table, and Eleanor's frail hands clutch a hand-embroidered handkerchief, a gift from James 10 years ago, back when he was a young man brimming with energy. Now, he's a 38-year-old man, consumed by work and his own family in Manchester, over 200 miles away. Eleanor doesn't blame James, but her heart tells a different story. It whispers a question she dares not voice aloud. If the final years of life are just waiting in solitude, then what is the meaning of family? That question isn't Eleanor's alone. It echoes in the hearts of millions of elderly people worldwide, those who spent their lives raising children, only to find that as their hair turns gray and their steps falter, they seem to fade into a distant memory in the lives of the very ones they cherish. A March 2025 report from the World Health Organization, WHO, reveals that loneliness among the elderly has surged by 15% since the COVID-19 pandemic, with the UK ranking among the hardest-hit nations. Technology has advanced, connecting people through screens more than through embraces, yet the invisible gap between generations grows wider. Eleanor is no exception. She embodies a painful reality. The distance between the elderly and their children in modern society isn't born from a lack of love, but from circumstances neither side can fully control. Eleanor turns on the TV, and the news is buzzing about a mental health crisis in the UK in 2025, where thousands of young adults like James grapple with the strain of remote work and soaring living costs. She listens, but doesn't fully grasp it. To her, the world out there moves too fast, too foreign. All she wants is for James to sit here, telling her about his day, the way she once told him bedtime stories when he was small. But James doesn't come. He calls every other week, sends money monthly, and texts, "Are you okay, Mum?" Gestures he thinks are enough to show his love. To Eleanor, though, they're like crumbs scattered on the table, not enough to fill the emptiness inside her. She doesn't need money. She needs him. And deep down, James needs her too, but he doesn't know how to break through the invisible wall of modern life. Eleanor and James's story isn't an accusation. It's an invitation to peer deeper into the unseen wound quietly tearing generations apart. The elderly, like Eleanor, don't ask for the world, they just want a small corner in their children's lives, a flicker of light to chase away the darkness of their final days. Meanwhile, children like James aren't heartless, they're simply caught in the whirlwind of work, responsibilities, and pressures they never asked for. This distance isn't the end, it's the beginning of a bigger question. How can we heal? This isn't just one person's problem. It's a story that belongs to all of us, those who were once children and who will one day become parents or grandparents. If you haven't called your aging loved ones today, if you assume they're fine because they don't say otherwise, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, when was the last time I truly listened to them? And if you're elderly, feeling forgotten, ask yourself, could my children be carrying burdens I've never known? Because at their core, both sides yearn for the same thing: to be understood, to be loved, to be together. The journey to healing doesn't start with grand gestures. It begins with two-way empathy, when the elderly learn to see the pressures their children face, and when children realize that time spent with their parents isn't a burden, but the most precious gift they can give. Eleanor still sits there, beneath the flickering light, but her story doesn't end in waiting. It will take us through pain, through moments that choke the throat with emotion, and ultimately, to a solution where the light doesn't just flicker, but glows brightly in the hearts of both generations. Step into this journey with us, so no one has to ask, what is family, if not the place where we belong? Why the elderly feel abandoned, and a journey to heal together. They cradled us through sleepless nights, wiped our tears, built our worlds, yet now, in their twilight, why do they sit alone, aching for a shadow of that care? Eleanor's chair creaks under her slight frame, a sound swallowed by the stillness of her London flat. At 78, she's a fragile silhouette against the window, where the city's pulse feels a universe away. Her son, James, lives in Manchester 200 miles, a lifetime apart. She doesn't hate him for it. She loves him fiercely, the way only a mother can. But that love twists into a quiet, gnawing pain when days stretch into weeks without his voice, his footsteps, his warmth. This isn't a story of blame, it's a window into a wound millions carry, a tender fracture between generations. As a psychologist might see it, Eleanor's sense of abandonment isn't just about James's absence. It's a tapestry of unmet needs, shifting worlds, and silent cries. Let's unravel it, thread by thread, not to judge, but to understand and perhaps to heal. 1. The generational abyss. Love lost in translation. Eleanor remembers a time when family was a living, breathing thing, her childhood home in 1950s Britain, filled with the clatter of her mother's pots, her father's laughter, her siblings' chatter. Love wasn't abstract. It was her mother's hands braiding her hair, her father's stories by the fire. That's how she raised James, every scrape knee kissed, every dream nurtured. She assumed that bond would endure, that he'd sit with her in her old age, sharing the same air. Instead, James exists in a digital blur, his life a mosaic of deadlines, diaper changes, and pixelated meetings. To him, love is efficiency, a text sent between calls, a bill paid online. To Eleanor, it's a ghost of what she craves, his physical presence, the weight of his hand on hers. This isn't just their story, it's a generational rift etched into our era. A March 2025 Age UK report reveals a stark divide. 70% of those over 75 define connection through touch, voice, proximity, while only 28% of those under 40 see it that way, leaning instead on screens and speed. James isn't cold, he's a product of a world that races too fast for Eleanor's slower rhythm. She can't fathom his exhaustion. The 55-hour weeks The Guardian flagged in 2025 as the new norm for UK professionals. He can't grasp why a WhatsApp message doesn't soothe her like a hug once did. Imagine her heart as a garden. Wilting for lack of sun, James waters it with drops from afar, not knowing she needs the full light of his time. This disconnect isn't abandonment by intent. It's a language lost between eras, leaving Eleanor adrift in a sea of longing. 2. The weight of unspoken hopes, a mother's silent plea. Eleanor doesn't dream of grand gestures. She pictures James dropping by with a loaf of bread, his daughters trailing behind, their giggles filling her hollow flat. She imagines him lingering over coffee, recounting a funny moment from his day, not because she's needy, but because those threads once stitched her life together. Instead, she gets a bi-weekly call, clipped and distracted, or a bank alert. Pound 200 deposited. James believes he's holding up his end, keeping her afloat in a world where survival costs too much. A 2025 BBC report pegs Manchester rents at £1,800 monthly. He's drowning in that tide, thinking money is his lifeline to her. But Eleanor measures love in moments, not pounds, and the chasm between her quiet hopes and his stretched reality carves a wound neither sees. From a psychological lens, this is expectation misalignment, a silent killer of connection. The British Psychological Society noted in 2025 that 68% of elderly parents yearn for regular, tangible presence, while only 22% of their children, crushed by modern demands, can deliver it. Eleanor doesn't voice her ache, she fears seeming weak, a burden. She recalls nights rocking James through fevers, her own dreams deferred to build his. Now, as her body falters, she wonders if that ledger of sacrifice has been erased. I gave him my youth, she murmurs to the dark one evening, tears tracing her cheeks. And he gives me a text, It's not ingratitude, it's a mother's soul crying for a mirror of the care she poured out. A mirror life's pace has shattered. 3. The echo of solitude, when absence becomes everything. Loneliness isn't new to Eleanor, it's an old companion, sharpened by time. Her husband slipped away 10 years ago, his chair still empty across from hers. Friends dwindled during the pandemic, their voices now just memories. Her street, once alive with neighborly nods, is a gallery of closed doors. The TV drones a lifeline to a world she can't join. Her knees ache with arthritis. Her vision blurs the edges of her books. When James doesn't come, that isolation swells, turning his absence into a personal void. It's not that he's her only link, it's that he's her last anchor to a life that's slipping through her fingers. The WHO's 2025 data paints this starkly. 1 in 3 UK seniors over 75 goes a week without meaningful contact, a crisis born from loss and fragility. Eleanor's world has shrunk to her flat's 4 walls, and James is the window she peers through. When he doesn't appear, it's not just a missed visit, it's a lifeline fraying. She won't tell him she'd rather fade than weigh him down. Picture her alone, clutching that handkerchief, whispering his name to the shadows. Her loneliness amplifies his distance into rejection, not because he intends it, but because her heart has nowhere else to turn. Healing begins when we see this not as blame, but as a call to bridge her solitude with our presence. 4. A world rewritten, when family drifts apart. Eleanor's mother died in her arms, surrounded by family, a scene etched into her understanding of love. In her youth, homes held generations, a symphony of shared lives. Today, that melody has faded. A 2025 BBC analysis shows only 18% of UK adults live near their aging parents, a plunge from 50% in the 1970s. James didn't flee to Manchester by choice, his tech job demanded it. A lifeline in a housing crisis where London flats cost £500,000. Eleanor knows this in her head, but her soul clings to an older script. Family stays close, no matter the cost. To her, his move feels like a chapter torn out, a betrayal of the closeness she built her life around. Globally, this shift from tight-knit clans to scattered nuclei mirrors a seismic change. Economic tides pull children away. Urban sprawl and job scarcity dictate where they land. Eleanor's flat is a sanctuary she can't replicate, near James's rented sliver of space. The world has redrawn family's map, and she's left stranded on an island of memory. Her sense of abandonment isn't personal, it's cultural. A fracture between how things were and how they are. Healing lies in rewriting that map, not with nostalgia, but with new ways to draw near. 5. The silence that screams, when words fail. If Eleanor could speak her truth, she might say, "James, I'm scared of the dark, of forgetting, of losing you." But her lips stay sealed, locked by a lifetime of resilience. James, too, holds back his exhaustion, his guilt when her calls go unanswered, his fear she'll see his limits. He assumes her silence means strength. She reads his brevity as apathy. They're two souls orbiting the same love, missing each other in the quiet. A 2025 Oxford study found 42% of elderly parents hide their needs, dreading dependence, while 53% of children misread that stoicism as contentment. It's a dance of muted longing, each step widening the gap. Imagine Eleanor tracing his initials on her window pane, willing him to sense her. Imagine James staring at his phone, her name glowing, but a client call pulls him away. They don't lack love, they lack the bridge of words. As a psychologist, I'd say this is where healing takes root. In daring to voice the unspoken, to say, "I need you," or "I'm trying." Without that, Eleanor's light flickers on, dimmed by a silence that feels like abandonment. Eleanor's pain isn't a verdict, it's a lens into a shared human struggle. These threads lost languages of love, unmet dreams, echoing solitude, a world apart, and muted voices weave her sense of being left behind. Yet within them lies a seed of hope. Understanding her hurt is the first step to mending it. Will James see her light dimming, and will he dare to reignite it? That's where our journey turns next. The pressure of being a child and the inner turmoil. Behind every unanswered call is a child drowning in their own life, wanting to reach out, but swept away by invisible waves. James sat hunched in the cramped corner of his Manchester study, the cold glow of his laptop screen casting weary shadows across his face. It was 10:37 p.m., and the house had finally fallen silent. His two young daughters were asleep, their steady breaths a distant comfort, and his wife, Sarah, had collapsed into bed, drained from the day's relentless demands. The stillness should have been a balm, a rare moment of reprieve in the storm of his life. But for James, it felt like a void, pulling him deeper into the guilt that had become his constant, unwelcome companion. His phone lay beside him, its screen dark and accusatory. "Call your mother. Call her now." He picked it up with trembling hands, scrolling to Eleanor, his mother's name glowing like a lighthouse in the dark. His thumb hovered over the call button, his heart pounding under the weight of what he knew he should do. But then, like clockwork, an email notification flashed. "Urgent. Client needs revisions by 8 a.m. His chest tightened, the familiar knot of dread twisting in his stomach. He set the phone down, rubbed his aching temples, and reopened his laptop. "I'll call tomorrow," he told himself, but even as the thought formed, he knew it was a lie. Tomorrow would bring another wave of responsibilities, another excuse to delay, another day his mother would wait in silence. As a psychologist, I've sat across from countless people like James, grown children who love their parents fiercely, but feel like they're failing with every missed call, every postponed visit. James isn't abandoning his mother, he's drowning. The relentless pace of modern life has stretched him thin, fraying him at the edges. The guilt of not being there for Eleanor is a boulder in his chest, heavy and unmoving. But this isn't a story of blame, it's a glimpse into the quiet desperation of a man trying to hold his world together as it slips through his fingers. 1. The unending grind, a race without a finish line. James's alarm blared at 6:45 a.m., dragging him from a restless sleep. The Manchester sky outside was still a pre-dawn gray, but his day had already begun. By 7 o'clock, he was logged into his first Zoom meeting, speaking with a client in Singapore. His voice was calm, professional, but his mind was already spinning, cataloging the dozen tasks waiting for him. After the call, he dove into a team meeting, then spent the next 3 hours fixing a critical bug in the software his company was developing. Lunch was a forgotten concept, a stale sandwich from the fridge, eaten in 5 hurried bites while answering emails. The afternoon blurred into a series of back-to-back meetings, each one bleeding into the next, until the clock struck 5:30. He bolted from his desk, heart racing as he realized he was late again to pick up his daughters from after-school care. "Daddy, why are you always the last one?" Lily, his 5-year-old, asked with wide, innocent eyes as he buckled her into the car. Her question cut through him like a blade. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Daddy's just busy," he muttered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Back home, the evening unraveled in a whirlwind of domestic chaos. Mia, his 8-year-old, needed help with fractions, her brow furrowed in frustration. Lily refused to eat her peas, pushing her plate away with a pout. Sarah moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her exhaustion mirroring his own as she folded laundry and packed tomorrow's lunches. By 9:30, the girls were finally in bed, and the house settled into an uneasy quiet. But for James, the workday wasn't over. His inbox pinged with another urgent request, a client demanding revisions by morning. He sank into his chair, the weight of it all pressing down on him like a physical force. This isn't exaggeration, it's his reality, and the reality of millions like him. A 2025 report from the UK's Office for National Statistics found that 62% of adults aged 30 to 45 work more than 45 hours a week, with 40% admitting to chronic stress. Remote work, once hailed as a solution, has blurred the lines between office and home, turning living rooms into 24/7 workstations. James is caught in that current, his life reduced to a treadmill set too fast, with no off switch. He isn't choosing work over his mother, he's trapped in a system where stopping means sinking, and sinking means failing his family. But in the stillness of his study, when the world finally pauses, he feels like a fraud, a son who can't even spare 5 minutes for the woman who gave him everything. Imagine him there, staring at his phone, Eleanor's name glowing like a lifeline. He aches to call her, to hear her voice, to ask about her day. But his mind is fogged with fatigue, and the thought of mustering the energy for one more conversation, one more demand makes his stomach churn. So he types a quick message. "Mom, are you okay? I'm swamped this week. We'll call soon." It's a fragile thread, a whisper of connection, but it's all he can manage. To Eleanor, it's a faint echo in the void. To James, it's a desperate shout into the abyss, hoping she'll understand. 2. The haunting guilt, a son's silent battle. James loves his mother with a depth words can't capture. He remembers her sacrifices the nights she worked double shifts at the factory to pay for his schooling. The way her rough, calloused hands smoothed his hair when he cried. Her smile when he graduated university was brighter than the sun, a beacon of pride that carried him through his darkest days. She was his rock, his safe harbor, and now, when she needs him, he's a ghost in her life. Guilt is his shadow, following him everywhere, dimming even the rare moments of joy. He can't ignore the 3 missed calls from her last week, each one a deeper stab into his conscience. "Why didn't I answer?" he berates himself, the question looping endlessly in his mind. The truth is brutal. He was in a meeting, or soothing Lily through an asthma attack, or simply too drained to speak. A 2025 study by the British Psychological Society reveals that 55% of adult children feel inadequate in caring for their aging parents, with 30% experiencing moderate to severe anxiety over it. James is among them, trapped in a cycle of self-reproach. He sends money £300 a month, enough for groceries and bills, but it feels like ransom, a transaction to quiet his conscience. He knows it's not enough. He knows she needs him, not his money. But what can he do? Quit his job? Uproot his family to London, where rents are double and jobs scarce? Pull his daughters from their school, their friends, their stability? The questions swirl in his head like a carousel of impossible choices, paralyzing him. One night, after a particularly grueling day, James sits on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. Sarah sleeps soundly beside him, unaware of the storm raging within him. He pictures Eleanor alone in her small flat, perhaps watching reruns of Countdown, her only companion the flickering TV screen. He imagines her disappointment, the way she must wonder if he's forgotten her. Tears sting his eyes, hot and sharp, but he blinks them away. "I'm a terrible son," he whispers into the darkness, the words bitter on his tongue. But even that feels self-indulgent, another failure, wallowing in sorrow instead of bridging the gap. Guilt is a maze with no exit, and James is lost inside it. 3. Memories and distance, the ache of what was. There are moments when memories of his mother flood back, vivid and piercing, stopping James in his tracks. He remembers the summer when he was 8, and Eleanor took him to Brighton Beach. She wore a faded floral dress, but her smile outshone the sun. They built sandcastles, and she patiently showed him how to dig moats to keep the tide from washing them away. "See, Jimmy, a little patience and it'll hold," she said, her voice warm like the hug she gave him after, when the waves soaked his shirt. He recalls winter evenings by the fireplace, her stories of her youth, how she used to waltz at the local dance hall, her shoes worn but her eyes sparkling. Now, she doesn't dance anymore. Her legs have grown weak, and her small London home has become a lonely world James can only visit in fleeting moments. He remembers his last visit, 3 months ago. She sat in her armchair, frail hands clutching a cold cup of tea. He fixed the leaky faucet, stocked her fridge, and tried to make her laugh with a story about Lily. But as he left, her eyes clung to him. She wanted him to stay, to fill the silence with more than quick fixes. He felt her unspoken plea, and it tore at him. But Monday came, and with it, the train back to Manchester, back to the life pulling him away. Manchester wasn't James's dream, it was his lifeline. In 2025, London's housing crisis peaked, with average home prices soaring to £650,000, as reported by The Times. Even with dual incomes, owning a home in the capital was a fantasy slipping further away each month. Manchester offered escape: a 3-bedroom house at half the price, a garden for the girls, and a growing tech sector for James's career. It was a decision made with hope, but a heavy heart. Leaving Eleanor felt like cutting a thread, but staying meant suffocating under debt and stress. 4. The lingering question: will he make it in time? James's pain isn't an excuse, it's his reality. His love for Eleanor is fierce, but buried under exhaustion, guilt, and distance. He's not the villain. He's a man trying to keep his world from unraveling with frayed and tattered threads. If I could tell him, I'd say, James, you're not failing, you're human. But love isn't just felt, it's shown. Find small ways to let your mother know she's still in your heart, even in the storm. And for all of us, the question remains: can James bridge the gap before the silence becomes too loud to bear? Healing Solutions, the light at the end of the tunnel. One small step can turn silence into laughter. Will you take it? The light at the end of the tunnel isn't a distant miracle. It's the small, patient, and loving actions we take. For James and Eleanor, healing their relationship didn't require grand gestures, but a commitment from both sides to understand and support each other. Below are practical solutions they can apply, not only to bridge the gap, but also to rebuild joy and connection within the family. With an optimistic and realistic tone, this story will show that no matter how busy or difficult life gets, love and care can always find a way. 1. Quality time, small moments, big impact. James couldn't overhaul his packed work schedule overnight, but he realized that small things could make a big difference. He decided to set aside 15 minutes each week for a video call with Eleanor, his mother. During these calls, he shared stories about his daughters. Lily had just learned a new song at school, and Mia had scored her first goal in a soccer match. These simple details were like invisible threads, pulling Eleanor back into the heart of the family, making her feel like an important part of their lives. Mom, Lily sang a beautiful song at school today. I'd love for you to hear it, James said, his voice full of pride as he looked at his mother through the screen. Mia scored a goal in her soccer game. She was so happy. I think you'd love to hear about it, he continued, smiling warmly. Eleanor smiled, her eyes lighting up as she heard about her granddaughters. It felt as though she was there, witnessing their joyful moments. These small stories brought her simple yet profound happiness, helping her forget the loneliness that once gnawed at her soul. James also made sure to ask about her life, even the mundane things. What did you watch on TV today, Mom? Did you see Mrs. Smith from next door? How is she? These questions weren't just polite small talk, they made Eleanor feel heard and cared for. Though it was only 15 minutes a week, it was 15 minutes of quality time where they could share and connect. James realized he didn't need to be with her for hours every day. These sincere moments were enough to soothe her sadness and ease his guilt. Mom, I know I can't be with you all the time, but I'll try to call you every week, James said, his voice full of determination. Thank you, James. I really appreciate these calls. Eleanor replied, her voice choked with emotion but happy. These brief calls became a bridge, bringing them closer. James understood that even though distance and time might separate them, love and care could still transcend it all. He just needed to take that small step. 2. Living closer. A small house, a big love. James knew that physical distance was one of the reasons Eleanor felt lonely. After many sleepless nights, he came up with the idea of building a tiny home next to his house for his mother. At a cost of about $30,000, it was a much more affordable and feasible solution than placing Eleanor in a nursing home, which could cost up to $80,000 a year. More importantly, living closer would help Eleanor feel less abandoned and allow James to visit her easily whenever he wanted. "Mom, I've been thinking about building a tiny house next to ours for you," James said, his eyes shining with hope. "That way, you can be closer to us, and I can visit you more often." "Oh, really? I'd love that. I don't want to be alone anymore," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling with emotion. The tiny house wasn't just a practical solution. It was a symbol of reunion. Living nearby gave James's daughters, Lily and Mia, the chance to be closer to their grandmother. They could run over to her house anytime, bringing laughter and joy, warming Eleanor's heart. She could join family activities like dinners or watching TV together, things she had only dared to dream of before. "Mom, I'd be so happy if you were closer to us. I'd feel more at ease knowing you're nearby," James said, hugging her tightly. "Me too, son. I'd love to be closer to you all," Eleanor replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. Living closer not only helped Eleanor escape loneliness, but also gave James peace of mind. He no longer had to worry about his mother living alone or not being cared for. The tiny house wasn't just a place to stay, it was a home filled with love, where the whole family could continue writing new chapters of their lives together. James realized that sometimes happiness doesn't lie in grand things, but in bringing loved ones a little closer. 3. Honest communication. Words from the heart. Silence had once been an invisible wall between James and Eleanor. She didn't want to bother her busy son, and James didn't want his mother to worry about the pressures he faced. But to heal, both needed to open up. One evening, as they sat together in the newly built tiny house, Eleanor decided to break the silence. "James, I feel so lonely when I'm alone. I know you're busy, but I miss you so much," she said, her voice trembling, her hands shaking. James took her hand, his eyes welling up as he heard those words. He took a deep breath and replied, "Mom, I want to be with you more, but work and family take up all my time. I feel so guilty for not being able to spend more time with you." Their confessions were like a cleansing rain, washing away the misunderstandings and silent pain that had built up over the years. Eleanor gently stroked her son's hand, her voice soft. "I understand, son. I don't want to be a burden. I just want to know that you still care about me. Mom, I always care about you. I'll try to make more time for you," James promised, his voice full of resolve. This honest conversation left both feeling lighter. They realized that neither was to blame, they both just longed to be understood and loved. James felt the guilt in his heart dissolve, replaced by motivation to take action. "Mom, I'll try to arrange more visits," he said, smiling. "Thank you, James. I really appreciate that," Eleanor replied, tears of happiness rolling down her cheeks. Honest communication not only helped them understand each other better, but also opened the door to mutual support. From then on, they no longer kept their feelings bottled up. Instead, they chose to share and overcome their difficulties together. A small step in communication had turned distance into connection. 4. Sharing responsibility. One family, one love. James realized he couldn't shoulder everything alone. He decided to ask his sister, Emily, who lived not too far away, to help care for their mother. Emily gladly agreed to visit Eleanor on weekends, taking her for walks or cooking their favorite family dishes together. "Emily, I really need your help. I can't be with Mom all the time, but if you could visit her on weekends, I'd be so grateful," James said over the phone. "Of course, James. I'd be happy to help. She's my mom too," Emily replied warmly. Emily's support not only eased James's burden, but also gave Eleanor another loved one by her side. She no longer felt like a burden, but a cherished part of the family. Their walks and cooking sessions made her feel that life had meaning again. "Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate your help," James said when he saw her one weekend. "We're family, James. I'm happy to be here for Mom," Emily replied with a smile. Sharing responsibility gave James peace of mind, knowing his mother wasn't just his responsibility but the family's. Eleanor felt loved by both her children. A close-knit family isn't one where one person does everything, it's where everyone shares the load together. 5. Shared joy. Moments of togetherness. To enrich Eleanor's life, James suggested the family plant a small garden together. Every weekend, they gathered to dig, plant, and care for the rose beds Eleanor loved. Lily and Mia were thrilled to help their grandmother, their laughter echoing through the garden. "Mom, let's plant more roses this weekend. I think you'd enjoy that," James said, holding a small shovel, his eyes twinkling with joy. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. I love roses," Eleanor smiled, her eyes bright with excitement. In the evenings, the family gathered to play board games. Laughter, playful banter, and even small arguments filled the room, banishing the loneliness Eleanor once felt. These activities not only brought joy, but also made her feel indispensable to the family. "Mom, I'm so glad we can do this together," James said, hugging her after a game filled with laughter. "Me too, son. I feel so happy," Eleanor replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. These shared moments not only helped Eleanor escape loneliness, but also made James feel lighter and happier. He realized that no matter how busy life gets, simple moments with family are the most precious. They are the true light at the end of the tunnel. The light at the end of the tunnel isn't a distant destination. It's the small, patient, and loving steps James and Eleanor took together. From brief video calls to the cozy tiny house, from heartfelt conversations to the support of the entire family, they turned pain into joy and distance into love. Life isn't perfect, but with understanding and effort, they prove that one small step can turn silence into laughter, and they took it together. She thought her son had forgotten her until the night everything changed. Eleanor sat in her small London flat, the faint hum of the city outside drowned by the stillness within. At 75, her world had shrunk to the four walls of her home, where a single table lamp flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows across the faded wallpaper. Her husband George had been gone for nearly a decade, and her only son James lived far off in Manchester, tangled in the demands of his career and his young family. She didn't resent him for it, at least. She tried not to, but the silence of her days weighed heavily, each unanswered message or unreturned call a quiet wound. She wondered if she'd become invisible, a ghost lingering in the margins of his busy life. Meanwhile, in Manchester, James hunched over his desk, the clock ticking past 10 p.m. The house was quiet, his daughters, Lily and Mia, tucked into bed, his wife, Sarah, asleep upstairs. His laptop glowed with emails he couldn't ignore, each one a thread in the web of stress that trapped him. At 38, he felt stretched thin, pulled between fatherhood, work, and a gnawing guilt he couldn't name. He glanced at his phone, Eleanor's name glowing softly in his contacts. His thumb hovered, then faltered. What would I even say? He thought. That I'll call more? That I miss her? The words felt empty, promises he'd broken before. He sighed, set the phone down, and turned back to his screen. Tomorrow, he told himself. I'll call her tomorrow. But tomorrow didn't come as he'd planned. The night that shattered the silence. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Eleanor, reaching for a teacup in her cramped kitchen, lost her balance. Her slippered foot slid on the worn linoleum, and she crumpled to the floor, her hips slamming against the tiles. Pain seared through her, stealing her breath. She lay there, helpless, the teacup shattered beside her, its pieces glinting under the dim light. Her phone sat on the counter, mocking her with its distance. The flat was silent, no footsteps, no voices, just the drip of the faucet and her ragged breathing. No one's coming, she realized, tears spilling down her cheeks. I could lie here for days. The loneliness she'd carried for years crystallized in that moment, sharp and unbearable. Hours crawled by until Mrs. Thompson, the neighbor across the hall, noticed Eleanor's kitchen lights still burning late into the night. Uneasy, she knocked, no answer. She dialed James, her voice trembling when he picked up. James, it's your mum. She's fallen, I've called an ambulance. Hurry. The 200-mile drive blurred into a haze of rain and headlights. James's hands gripped the wheel, his mind racing with images of his mother alone, hurt, waiting. When he stumbled into her hospital room, he found her small and frail, her leg in a cast, her eyes closed. He collapsed into the chair beside her, his sobs breaking the sterile silence. Mom, I'm so sorry, he choked out. I should have been there. I should have called. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open, meeting his tear-streaked face. Her voice was faint but steady. James, you're here now. A promise born of regret. James stayed through her recovery, watching as nurses adjusted her pillows and doctors checked her chart. The fall had fractured more than her hip, it had cracked open the distance between them, exposing the raw truth of their estrangement. He couldn't erase the image of her sprawled on that cold floor, nor the guilt that clawed at him. But guilt alone wasn't enough. It was love fierce, belated love that pushed him to act. Back in Manchester, he sat with Sarah, his voice low but resolute. I can't let her stay there alone anymore. What if it happens again? Sarah nodded, practical yet kind. We could build something here, a small place for her. The girls would love it, and so would I. And so, they did. An annex, a cozy granny flat, began to take shape beside their home, a modest haven with a bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a view of the garden. When James proposed it to Eleanor, her eyes clouded with doubt. I don't want to weigh you down, she said, her hands twisting in her lap. He knelt beside her hospital bed, taking those hands in his. Mom, you're not a weight. Your family, Lily and Mia, need you. I need you. Her lips trembled, and she nodded, a tear slipping free. For the first time in years, she felt not just seen, but wanted. Stitching the pieces together. The move wasn't seamless. Eleanor struggled to leave her old flat, with its memories of George and decades past. James wrestled with his own balancing act, work still loomed, but now he had a new priority. Yet, they found a rhythm. Sundays became sacred. Family nights in the annex, filled with laughter, Monopoly games, and the girls' chatter. Eleanor taught Lily to sketch flowers, her gnarled fingers guiding the pencil, and read bedtime stories to Mia, her voice weaving magic into the air. One evening, as the sky darkened and the porch light flickered, Eleanor watched James chase his daughters through the garden. She saw the strain in his shoulders, the love in his eyes, and understood. He hadn't abandoned her out of neglect, but out of necessity, stretched too thin by life's demands. Forgiveness came quietly, not as a grand gesture, but as a release of the ache she'd held so long. Later, as James walked her back to the annex, she paused beneath that flickering light. James, she said, her voice soft but firm. You don't need to give me the world. Just being here, that's enough. He blinked back tears, managing a smile. I'm here, Mum, and I'm not going anywhere. The light that held. The annex became more than walls and a roof, it was a lifeline. Eleanor joined the family's daily pulse. Morning chats with Sarah over tea, afternoons painting with Lily, quiet evenings with James sharing a biscuit and a story. The loneliness that had once defined her dissolved, replaced by the messy, beautiful chaos of belonging. For James, the guilt ebbed like a receding tide. He still worked late some nights, but now he'd stop by the annex on his way in, trading a few words or a hug. He learned to carve out time's small, precious slivers, and found that they were enough. Peace settled over him, a gift he hadn't known he needed. One crisp night, they sat together under the porch light, its flicker a familiar comfort. Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes bright. "I used to think you'd forgotten me," she admitted. "But now I see you were just holding on as best you could." James swallowed hard, nodding. "I never forgot, Mum. I just didn't know how to do it all." She smiled, her grip steady. "You don't have to do it all, love. Just be here." And in that moment, beneath the flickering light, they healed not with grand gestures, but with presence, with time, with love that refused to let go. This is The Flickering Light, a story of fractures and mending, of distance and return. It's a reminder that healing doesn't demand perfection, just the courage to show up, again and again, until the light holds steady. The light that never fades. Tomorrow might be too late. What will you say to them today? Life moves fast, too fast, sometimes. In the quiet corners of homes across the world, elderly parents and grandparents sit waiting. They wait for a phone call, a knock on the door, or just a whisper of reassurance that they haven't been forgotten. Meanwhile, their adult children rush through days filled with work, family, and endless to-do lists, promising themselves they'll reach out tomorrow. But tomorrow has a way of slipping into next week, next month, or next year until one day, it's too late to say the things that matter most. This is a story about connection, about the invisible threads that tie generations together. At its core, it's simple. The elderly need their children, the children need time, but both need understanding. It's not about money or grand gestures. It's about presence, about showing up in the small ways that mean everything. This conclusion is an invitation, a call to reflect, to act, and to heal the rifts that time and distance can create. The silent longing of the elderly. Picture an elderly woman sitting alone, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a phone that rarely rings. She doesn't ask for much, just a few minutes, a familiar voice, a reminder that she still holds a place in her children's lives. The elderly aren't looking for pity. They're yearning for connection. Years of raising families, working hard, and weathering life's storms have left them with wisdom to share if only someone would listen. But it's not just their story. Their children, caught in the chaos of modern life, feel the weight too. They want to call, to visit, to sit and talk like they used to, but time slips away. A deadline looms, a child needs attention, a bill demands payment, and suddenly, another day passes without that call. The guilt builds quietly, a shadow that grows with every missed opportunity. The power of small steps. Here's the truth. Healing doesn't require a grand overhaul of your life. It starts with the simplest act. Pick up the phone. Give them a hug. That's the strongest healing medicine. A 5-minute call to say, "I love you." A quick visit to share a cup of tea. A handwritten note slipped into the eye. These are the moments that rebuild what time has worn away. Think about it. When was the last time you heard your parents' voice? Not through a rushed text, but in a real conversation? When was the last time you felt their arms around you? Or offered them yours? These aren't just gestures, they're lifelines. They tell the elderly they're not alone, and they free their children from the regret of, "I wish I had." A mirror to your own life. Let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what if today was your last chance to say, "I love you"? Would you let it pass because you're too busy, too tired, too far away? Or would you stop right now and make it happen? This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. We get one shot at this life. One chance to love the people who shaped us. Don't let it slip through your fingers. Pick up the phone. Give them a hug. It's not just for them, it's for you. It's the peace of knowing you didn't wait too long. The joy of hearing their laugh. The comfort of keeping that bond alive. The elderly don't need your perfection. They need your presence. And you don't need more time, you just need to use the time you have. A community of connection. Stories like these don't end with words on a page, they live in the actions they inspire. That's why this channel exists. To bring families closer, to share real stories of reconnection, and to offer a space where you're not alone in this journey. If this message resonates with you, if you feel that spark to reach out to your own loved ones, join us. Subscribe, share your story in the comments, or pass this along to someone who needs it. Together, we can build a community that values presence over distance, love over regret. Your support keeps this mission alive. Every subscription, every shared story, is a step toward a world where no one waits in silence. Let's keep this light burning together. The time is now. Tomorrow might be too late. What will you say to them today? Let that question sink in. Let it move you. The elderly in your life, your parents, your grandparents aren't asking for the world. They're asking for you. And you, in turn, deserve the chance to hold on to them while you can. So don't wait. Pick up the phone. Give them a hug. That's the strongest healing medicine. Call them today, not tomorrow. Visit them this weekend, not next month. Tell them they matter, that you're grateful, that you love them, because love, when acted upon, is the most powerful force we have. It bridges years, mends hearts, and keeps the light of family alive. This isn't just a conclusion, it's a beginning. It's your chance to rewrite the story of your family, to turn longing into laughter, silence into conversation. The elderly need their children, the children need time, but both need understanding, and that starts with you, right now. Thank you for reading. Let today be the day you take that step.